trained as a bombardier navigator and joined a B-17 crew in December of 1943.
I was a sergeant in the U.S. Special Forces. I served in Vietnam on an A-team. I was trained as a medic and a light weapons infantryman.
I joined actually the National Guard in 1985 when my father, a retired major from the Air Force, said, "Lynn, get a job or get out of the house." And I'm very happy that I did. I spent 22 years. I was enlisted first.
I joined in 1990 at 17 years of age in the United States Navy Reserve. Did 8 years here locally as a Navy reservist from 1990 to 1998. I then switched over to the United States Army Reserve with the 401st Civil Affairs Battalion out of Webster, New York.
And was deployed to England in the 8th Air Force in March of 1944. I flew 20 missions as a bombardier on B-17 and was shot down on my 20th mission. Was a prisoner of war of the Germans from July of 1944 until May of 1945, when we were liberated by the Russians.
Our camp was under siege for over a month, and during the first hours of the battle, I was wounded a number of times. But in spite of being wounded, I continued to go out and provide first aid to. There were 12 Americans in the camp, and the rest were all Montagnards and Vietnamese. And I continued to provide aid to them and continued to man my position, which was a 4-deuce mortar pit, until I collapsed, and then I was finally medevaced, I believe, probably about 2 days into the battle.
Made it to Staff Sergeant and then went to Officer Candidate School and got commissioned in June of 1992. And I spent a year in Iraq from October 2004 to September of 2005. And then I retired in 2007, April of 2007.
And then at the tail end of my career, I went back over to the Navy Reserve. I was a first-class petty officer there from 2008 until 2012. So a total of 20 years of service in the reserves with 3 mobilizations.
What does Veterans Day mean to you?
Veterans Day is a day of reflection, for us to think about, those heroes who've gone before us. I had a great opportunity just last weekend. I went down to Washington on an honor flight on Mission 30, which was, something we honor those World War II and Korean veterans, taking them down to Washington so that they can visit their memorials. And it is truly an honor to be able to spend a few days with them and to be able to, share in some of their memories and see them, have a little bit of time with friends and family and former colleagues out in Washington.
As one who has been on this flight, it brings tears to my eyes when I arrive and see the dedication of the volunteers that help the veterans onto the plane, that stay with them the whole trip through the experience of going to the monuments, and of course the act of taking them too.
The big piece is coming home here. Before you've gone, you'd think the signature moment would be going to the memorial, if it's a Korean vet at the Korean War Memorial or World War II vet at the World War II Memorial. And as powerful as that is, at homecoming here in Rochester, to see all of the community that turns out.
I don't know how many men and women do it now, going over 4 or 5, 6 times deployed. What a stress on the family.
Well, I think from my experience, I have an insight into both what happens with veterans in training and in combat, and also the stress that it may put on their families. As an ex-POW, as you can imagine, I had a wife. We were married 3 weeks before I went into the war, and She received the usual telegrams and went through the period of uncertainty and the stress and all that. And so I have a great appreciation for not only what the veterans are giving of their lives, but also what their families are going through too.
Now, there seems to, people in the public have an understanding that there's a difference between the conflict or the war and the person that's in the military. And whether or not they agree with the conflict or the war, that was a political decision that was made by someone or a group. But they appreciate the service and sacrifice of the individual who said, I'm there, or I can be there if you need me. And I think that's been a huge change over the last 30 years or so.
For those World War II veterans, you know, many of them have reflected on when we've been down in Washington. That was my second time flying down there, that they hadn't really heard anyone say thank you to them in quite a few years. You know, for many of them also, they didn't come back right in 1945. You know, it wasn't as though they had a ticker tape parade in New York City. The gentleman that I escorted down as a guardian several months ago, he was in the United States Navy. At 19, he was a combat veteran with nearly 2 years in the military. He didn't get back until late spring, early summer of 1946. Discharged out of Naval Yard down in New York City, took a train back to Rochester, and then he lived out in the Sodus area, kind of half walked home, half hitchhiked home, and didn't get home until the middle of the night. It's 46, nobody locks their doors, and he went in and went back in his room and went to bed, didn't want to wake his parents up, and in the morning, geez, you're home, welcome home. And I think every generation of veterans has had sort of a different homecoming.
I see more and more people that are saying to veterans, thank you for your service. And certainly I don't think I heard that term for 50 or 60 years after I left the military. But now I recommend to people that they do it because it gives you some sort of a feeling inside when you say it too.
I think the community learned a lot from what happened to veterans from Vietnam who are still having a very, very difficult time, many of them homeless, many of them without jobs. And Vietnam veterans, they're close to us now. It wasn't that long ago, and I think people finally recognize we can't do that to our veterans anymore.
For those Korean War veterans, that forgotten war, many of them didn't have someone, say thank you when they got home. And certainly for, our Vietnam veterans, much different homecoming than there is today. And I think in many ways, one of the things that is much more positive now, I think, is that America as a society has learned how to disconnect the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines from the politics. I think people can disapprove of the war, yet really be supportive of our soldiers.
When men and women join the military and go off to defend this country, they do it because they love this country and because they love the communities from which they come. And then to come back and not receive any kind of thanks, like Don was saying, thank you, not only makes us feel good, but it makes the person who says it feel good. And those of us who came back from Vietnam never heard thank you. And I think that, I hope that our country has learned that that thank you is a wonderful, wonderful thing that can mean so much to a veteran.
What did being in the military do for you as a person, and how has it influenced your life, to who you are today?
4 of us were the first ones in the state of Texas to get the POW medal, and we had people interviewing us. What does it mean to you to get the POW medal? Well, you never set out first to get one. They didn't have one, and somehow when it comes 44 years later, it doesn't quite have the impact. However, I appreciate the fact that they finally decided that some recognition should be given to those that had given a portion of their life as a prisoner.
Whenever I'm asked that question too, the first thing that comes to my mind is a quote that we had seen on a Special Forces team house. And that quote, it was credited to a Marine at Quezon who wrote this quote on a sea ration box. But I always say I doubt that story because I never met a Marine that could write. And,
That's not what this is about.
Okay.
but they always
All
told
right.
me that that's okay because none of you guys in the Army could read anyhow.
All right, we're all Army.
Yeah, we're all Army.
Army at the time, okay.
But the quote was, to really live, you must almost die. To those that fight for it, life has a meaning the protected will never know. And I just retired from 33 years as a middle school counselor. And so for 33 years, I've been trying to pass this message on to the new generation about what's life mean to me now that war has taught me. And I could go on for 33 years trying to put it into words, but I think the main message that I try to pass on to young people and the main message that I've learned about how my life is different is that as I look back on my life, I've learned that there's a big difference between success and significance in life. And at this point in my life, what means the most to me now is I can look back and I feel where life has become significant to me. I look at people now and I value them. I value the time that I have with them.
You know, there are unpleasant things. Somehow time tends to erase those, and you think of the positive things that happened. You think of the close connection that you made with people, and that connection stays for the rest of your life.
When you've experienced that kind of history or historical moment, when you come back, it's almost like everything else is mundane and boring. And you have to retrain yourself to appreciate those small moments that you have, because you're in a situation that your awareness is heightened all the time, your emotions are heightened all the time, and then you get back and you have to get over a letdown. This is not exciting. You know, I mean, it's just not exciting. And it's a difficult transition to allow yourself to start appreciating those moments and those people again.
What did being in the military, how did it impact your life?
I think many times when we're here in the United States, it's kind of a provincial worldview. To be able to go overseas and to be able to see what others don't have that we have as Americans. Being able to come home, it inspired me to go back to school, to take advantage of my education. I'll tell you, there's very few times that I go into a Wegmans and I don't think about being there. You know, you saw people who were starving, who didn't have enough food, and you know, to be able to afford food for my wife and my children, I don't take that for granted like I did before I'd gone over.
So it's changed you.
It definitely has changed me.
What is the motivation for somebody to go into the service?
Each generation produces its heroes, and each generation has had people who've answered the call to serve. I think when you look at this generation, one of the things that's truly remarkable is over the last decade plus, we've fought sustained conflict, some of our nation's longest wars overseas, and this has been done with an all-volunteer force. Every one of those men and women has stepped forward and has volunteered, you know, to serve in our nation's military. Like earlier generations, they're truly the best and the brightest that our society has to offer.
Anybody who fights no war does not fight because he hates what's in front of him. He fights because he loves what's behind him, and because he is loved from behind. It's something that our nation is learning, that we fight because we love what is here and what is behind us. And I feel that much of what we're seeing now when the phrase "thank you for your service" is spread, it's coming from a heart of love from a nation that is realizing once again that there are men and women who love this country so much that they'd be willing to die for it.
Well, I think on behalf of a grateful community, we all just want to say thank you